Now, the abomination that maketh desolate is mentioned in three particular contexts. And we're going to discover what this abomination is shortly, what it represents. So first of all, in Daniel chapter 11, verse 31, which is a history leading us through many of the events taking place between the king of the north and the king of the south in earlier time, before the Lord Jesus Christ's day. In Daniel 11, verse 31, they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. Now we're going to show that that event actually took place in BC 167. That's a clear fulfillment understood by many who study Daniel chapter 11, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But in Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, there's a different time period. He shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. So we can see there again descriptions associated with the abomination that maketh desolate. And we're going to show that that occurred in AD 70, when the Roman legions came into Jerusalem. Then finally, in Daniel chapter 12 and verse 11, in regard to the abomination that maketh desolate, we're going to see there the abomination that maketh desolate is set up. And from that time there shall be 1,290 days, specific time period given there. All right, let's look at that in a little bit more detail. In Daniel 11, verse 31, when Antiochus Epiphanes captured Jerusalem, he put in Jerusalem, in the temple, a statue to Zeus, and to further pollute the whole the temple and to defy the Jews, he offered a pig on the altar of incense. So he polluted the holy place there, and for 3 years that pollution was under the control, that whole area was under the control of Antiochus Epiphanes. But 3 years later, 164 BC, the Maccabees actually took back the city and cleared the temple and reconsecrated it for worship. So next is Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, AD 70. And this is what Jesus is referring to in when he gives the Olivet prophecy in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and in Luke chapter 21, verse 20, when he says, when you see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. So that's the only time the word desolation appears in the New Testament on 3 occasions in those references to the Olivet prophecy. When you shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Let them which be in Judea flee to the mountains. And so the Roman legions came in 70 AD and defiled and destroyed the temple. So the key thing to notice here is that the abomination of desolation is something which stands in the holy place. In other words, it's something which is located. When it's actually in operation, it's located in the temple precinct. So the first occasion with Antiochus Epiphanes, that's what happened. Second occasion, Jesus says the abomination is in the holy place. And in Daniel chapter 12, verse 11, the abomination that maketh desolate is set up. And the context shows us that this is indicating a long-term established structure that desecrates the temple site and makes worship there impossible. And so it's clear from Daniel chapter 12, verse 11, that is set up for a long period of time from, we're going to show, AD 688. So what is the abomination that maketh desolate? In 167 BC, Antiochus Epiphanes offers the swine to Zeus. AD 70, Jerusalem, the temple is destroyed by the Romans, and we can see there from the Arch of Titus how the menorah, the lampstand, is taken away. And in AD 688, the dome of the rock is set up on the very holy site of the temple. So the abomination that maketh desolate is a desecration that makes worship at the temple site impossible. It stands in the holy place. It desecrates the area, pollutes the temple site, and worship is no longer possible. So from 167 BC, there was no access to the temple site, to the place of worship that God has chosen, for 3 years only. From AD 70, though, there was that destruction meant that the Jews could only worship there in sort of fits and starts, we might say, spasmodic access, for 600 years. And then from 688 AD, the Dome of the Rock is set up there, and there's no access, and we're told the time period in Daniel chapter 12, for 1,290 years. The abomination that makes desolate makes the worship impossible there. So let's turn now to Daniel chapter 12. In Daniel chapter 12, we have those 3 time periods that we're going to look at in some detail now. The 1260 days, the 1290 days, and the 1335 days. And these are all time periods which come to the conclusion within that period, as Brother Thomas put it, that period called the time of the end. Okay, so let's look at the 3 time periods. When we look at Daniel chapter 12, we'll see that we are given the end date to the 1260 days. We're not actually given the start date as such. We are given the event which will show us that that time period has come to an end. With the 1290 days, we're actually given the event which shows us the start date. And for the 1335 days, well, we're told to wait until then. So we have an end date for one period of time, a start date for the other period of time, and no specific date, even though that period is related to the previous period. Let's have a look. So we're given the end date of the 1260 days, the event, as Brother Thomas says, these will be unmistakable fulfillments, which will help us to see the wise to understand that we're in the time of the end. Verse 7 of Daniel 12. It shall be for a time, times and a half, and when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. Daniel's asked, when's the end? We know how long. All things will be finished. You'll be in the end of the time when scattering was possible for the holy people. Well, we know the quotation from Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 10, he that scattered Israel will gather him and keep him as a shepherd doth his flock. That's the return of the Jews to their land and being kept by God as a shepherd keeps his flock. So it's an end of the scattering, accomplished to scatter. When did it become no longer possible to scatter the Jewish people? Well, it was 1948. You cannot scatter the Jews anymore. 1948, time period number 1, the event that marks the end is when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people. And we know that the Jews can no longer be scattered. They have a homeland now. And I guess I think of an Australian, a famous Australian, Sir Frank Lowy, who was, as a young boy, he was confined to an area in Hungary while his father was taken off to Auschwitz, and his father was actually beaten to death because he refused to give up his prayer shawl. As a young man, after the war, he escaped to France, and then eventually, even though the British confined him in Cyprus for a period, he got to the Holy Land. He fought in the Haganah, and then soon after, in the early 1950s, he followed his family to Australia. He started a little small goods store in Western Sydney and grew that into the great empire of the Westfield Shopping Centres complex, which is actually around the world now, in America and the UK and Europe, as well as throughout Australia. And he became, at one stage, Australia's wealthiest man. But in his early 80s, multi-billionaire as he was and famous, he still felt the pull to the Holy Land. He still felt that as a Jew, he He really was always the object of extra attention, being Jewish. And so he decided in his early 80s that he would sell all of the Westfield shopping complexes and all of his wealth, and he would move to Israel. And when he got to Israel, he said, "I feel as though I'm home." And that's the case for the Jews, isn't it? They no longer need to feel as though they are scattered. If they want to go to Israel, they can go to Israel, and they're very, very welcome, of course. And thousands upon thousands of them are going back to the Holy Land, because no longer can they feel as though they are going to be the object of scattering. They are the scattering is accomplished. God has given them a homeland, and that occurred and was fulfilled in 1948. Well, the first time period we're given in Daniel chapter 12 says that it's 1260 days until it ends, until the scattering has ended, 1948. So if we count back, we go back to 688 AD. Very interesting date, as we know already. 688 AD is the date when the construction of the Dome of the Rock began. So, the three time periods of Daniel chapter 12. What about the second one? The second one, we're actually given the start date, 1290 days. From the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1290 days. So it's the abomination that maketh desolate set up. That is, the idea that there is now a permanent abomination or pollution upon the holy site. The abomination that maketh desolate. It's an abomination because, of course, it's so far removed from the things of the truth. It's a pollution. And it makes desolate in the sense that it's impossible to worship, and people, of course, feel empty, desolate, because they cannot go to that holy place to worship. So from that period, 1290 days. Time period number 2, we're given the event that marks the beginning of that period, and it lines up the start date, 1290 days, when construction on the Dome of the Rock actually began. So the abomination that maketh desolate is set up. It's set up for 1290 days, and that period ends in 1978. 1978. We haven't taken a lot of notice, perhaps, as a Brotherhood, Christadelphians, of what actually happened in 1978. We haven't spoken too much about it. But 1978 was actually a very, very significant year, particularly in relation to the holy sites. The area of Jerusalem, the area of the temple. What happened in 1978? The Camp David Accords. Let's have a think about the Camp David Accords. In 1978, this was considered so significant by the world at large that the 1978 Nobel Peace Prize was shared by President Sadat of Egypt and Prime Minister Begin of Israel. Of course, President Carter was the central negotiator.
In 1978, the leaders of Egypt and Israel met with President Jimmy Carter at the presidential retreat at Camp David, Maryland. The meeting gave birth to the Camp David Accords, a framework for peace in the Middle East. In 1947, the United Nations voted to divide the British-controlled Palestinian territories into two countries, Israel and Palestine. This led to a series of conflicts known as the Arab-Israeli Wars, which would continue for the next 3 decades. Over 700,000 Palestinians became refugees in special territories in Arab states neighboring Israel. By 1967, Israel had expanded and occupied Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. Sinai Peninsula bordered the eastern bank of the Suez Canal, one of the most heavily trafficked maritime trade routes in the world. Then, in 1970, in the midst of Egypt's economic struggle, Anwar al-Sadat became the president. Sadat ordered an attack on Israel on the Jewish Yom Kippur holiday in 1973 in an attempt to regain territory and convince Israel of Egypt's power. In 1978, a little over a year after taking office, President Jimmy Carter invited Sadat and Israel's Prime Minister Menachem Begin to his retreat at Camp David, Maryland. Serving as an intermediary, Carter worked with each leader separately to draft 2 dual accord documents in a secretive 12-day process. The document stipulated that Israel give the Sinai Peninsula back to Egypt. In exchange, Egypt would give Israel permission to use the Suez Canal for trade. The significance of these agreements did not go unnoticed. Sadat and Begin received the 1978 Nobel Peace Prize. Egypt and Israel officially began a diplomatic relationship and reinstated trade between them.
Now, in 1978, we might say, well, the accords don't really mention anything significant about Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is what we're talking about now, with the no longer being trodden down, and with the temple site being cleared of pollution. Well, that's true. General Dayan was actually the foreign minister of Israel, and he was part of the drawing up of those accords. And there was a number of officials from both sides, Egypt and Israel, were there at Camp David in America under the guidance of Jimmy Carter. There were in fact a number of letters and annexations associated with the wording of the Camp David Accords. And here is the most significant of them all. Written on September the 17th, 1978 by President Sadat of Egypt via Jimmy Carter. And there are a number of matters here relevant to Jerusalem. There were 7 points. We're only going to highlight the 5th point because it's the most important one, the most significant one. Dear Mr. President, says Sadat, I'm writing to reaffirm the position of the Arab Republic of Egypt with respect to Jerusalem. Point number 5. All peoples must have free access to the city and enjoy the free exercises of worship and the right to visit and transit to the holy places without distinction or discrimination. Now, that's incredible. That was, of course, the first time that any Muslim had said, yes, you can have access to the holy place. The Jews can have access. Now, that hasn't necessarily been totally easy since then, but it's marked the turning point. It's marked the turning point when the abomination of desolation no longer is in total control of what happens on what we call the Temple Mount, the area of the Temple Mount. He admits, the great power of Egypt, that now, of course, Jerusalem, in terms of sovereignty, is under the hands of Israel, but they have allowed the Muslims to maintain their worship there. He now says everyone can have free access. The abomination of desolation there is no longer exclusive. So that's a huge turning point, 1978, and a recognition that no longer is that area exclusively under the control of the Muslims. What's happened since? Well, 688, 1290 days, 1978, here's the beginning of the abomination of desolation. Everyone should have free access to the city to exercise worship in the holy places. And here is a very interesting short video, which was recorded less than a month ago with the visits to the Temple Mount by Jewish worshippers. Enjoy.
Is extraordinary is that we are praying on the Temple Mount, facing the place of the Holy Temple. It's extraordinary because, as I said a couple of years ago, we've all been arrested for doing this. It's extraordinary because for 2,000 years Jews couldn't do this. It's extraordinary because we've made it this far. We're this close. After the silent prayer, the prayer leader repeats the prayer out loud, and we all answer Amen at the appropriate places. That's what we're doing right now. As you see background, people praying and people reciting verses from Tanakh, from the Hebrew scriptures. Again, any of this until a couple of years ago, you'd be stopped by the police, taken off the mount, taken in for questioning, maybe for a few hours, and distanced from the mount, maybe for months. We've made a lot of progress. We have a lot more progress to make. And we're making this progress because people are going up. Jews are going up to the Temple Mount, and in larger and larger numbers, and insisting, and not being silent.
So we have the 3 time periods of Daniel chapter 12. The 1260 days, we had the information about the end date, and so we've discovered that the start date was 688, 1260 days to 1948, and no more scattering of the Jews. 1290 days, we're given the start date, and it's the same as for the 1260 days, 688 plus 1290 days, the Dome of the Rock, the Abomination, and significant changes happening there, which will, of course, continue to increase the freedoms of worship on that place until ultimately that abomination is removed. Then we have the 1335 days. Now, we're not told a start or an end date specifically for the 1335 days, but I ask the question, are the angels trying to trick us or to fool us by not giving Daniel a clear start or an end date for the 1335 days? Is it just a guessing competition? Well, no, it's not. What they've told us is that in the time of the end period, the wise are going to understand. So how can we use what we've found so far to understand the 1335 days? Let's read it very carefully. Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. Now we believe we are among the wise. When is the time of the end? And when is the end of the time of the end? Verses 11 and 12, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he that watcheth and cometh to the 1,335 days. So the wise will understand that after the 1290 days conclude, they have to wait for just another 45 years to the end of the 1,335 days. So there'll be 1290 days, but watch and wait and come to the 1335 days, just 45 years later. For then they will arrive at the end of the time of the end period, called the end of the days. So here Daniel's told, wait after the 1290 and come to the 1335, 45 days or years later, but go thy way till thy end be, until the end be, for thou shalt rest and stand in thy lot at the end of the days. End of the days is the end of the 1335 days. 45 years after the end of the 1290 years, 45 years after 1978. So we have the information about the period of 1260 very clearly. We know that the beginning of that period is also the beginning of the 1290 days, 1978, that concludes. 1335 days, the wise will conclude the start date is the same, 688, and we wait until 2023, 45 years from 1978. So remember, Brother Thomas said, the time of the end has its beginning and ending, and period intermediate between the beginning and the ending. The time of the end then begins in 1917, the end of the 2,520 days, the 7 times. The Turks were driven out of Jerusalem. The king of the south pushed them out. The Jews were invited to rebuild their homeland. 1948, Daniel chapter 12, the 1260 days, the scattering of the holy people comes to an end. 1967, the 2,300 days, which was the treading underfoot by the little horn of the goat, Daniel chapter 8, Jerusalem is no longer trodden down underfoot by the Gentiles. 1978, 1290 days, and the end begins for the abomination of desolation, the Dome of the Rock, with the opening up of that area to worship for all as the Egyptian president said. So it was the beginning of the end for the abomination of desolation. And 2023 will be the end of the end for the abomination of desolation. 1335 days, Daniel chapter 12, the end of the time of the end, and Daniel will stand in his lot. This is exciting. And so will we at the end of the days, as the last words of Daniel chapter 12 tell us. So looking at it in graphic form, 1917, the Ottomans are pushed out, and 1948, the end of the scattering. 2300 days in 1967, Jerusalem no longer trodden down, very clear. As Brother Thomas said, these things will be really clear for those who understand and are looking for them in this time of the end period. 1978, the access to the Temple Mount is given, 1290 days. And 2023, Daniel stands in his lot at the end of the days. Understand, O Son of Man, Daniel chapter 8 said, for at the time of the end shall be the vision. So remember Daniel chapter 2, the striking of the stone upon the image. Nebuchadnezzar was told this vision is all about the latter days. In Daniel chapter 4, the 7 times, Nebuchadnezzar says, I came to the end of the days. It's the end of that time period. How long? 2300 days until the end, when these things are finished. 1978, again, access to the Temple Mount and the abomination of desolation no longer it's getting very close. Daniel said it'll start then, but was told it'll start then, but you've got to wait another 45 years. Blessed is he that waits until the abomination of desolation is overcome. 2023, Daniel stands in his lot at the end of the days. Blessed is he that watcheth, and cometh to the 1330 days. Go thy way till the end be, for thou shalt rest, which he has done for many, many years now. But he will stand in his lot at the end of the days. What's got to happen between now and 2023? If our understanding of all this is correct, it's hard to see why it's not correct. But if it is correct, then between now and then, the Lord will descend from heaven with a shout and the voice of the archangel. The dead in Christ shall rise, will be taken to the place of judgment, and Daniel, and we trust us too, will receive his reward. Daniel chapter 12, verse 13, the end of the time of the end. 2023, the wise shall understand.